I moved into that apartment in late October, mostly because it was cheap and close to my night shift job. It was on the third floor of an older building, the kind where the hallway lights flicker for a second before fully turning on. The landlord told me the previous tenant had left suddenly, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The first week was completely normal. I'd get home around 2:30 a.m., make something quick to eat, and go to bed. The only thing that stood out was how quiet the building was at night. No footsteps, no TVs, nothing. It almost felt like I was the only person living there after midnight. About 10 days in, I started noticing small things that didn't feel right. The first time, I came home and saw that my bathroom light was on. I was sure I had turned it off before leaving, but I figured maybe I was just tired and forgot. A couple nights later, it happened again, except this time it was my bedroom door. I always kept it closed when I left, but when I got back, it was slightly open, just enough to notice. I remember standing there for a second, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I checked the entire apartment, closets, under the bed, everything. Nothing was out of place, and nothing was missing. Still, I started locking my bedroom door before leaving, just to be sure. That worked for a few days. Then one night, I came home and immediately felt something was off. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like it had been closed up all day, even though I always left a window slightly open. I walked into my room and saw the door was still locked, just like I left it. But when I unlocked it and stepped inside, my desk chair was turned toward the door. I always pushed it in under the desk before leaving. I stood there, just staring at it, my heart beating faster than it should have been. I told myself maybe I hadn't pushed it in all the way, that it somehow rolled back on its own, even though the floor was perfectly flat. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I went out and bought a cheap security camera. I set it up on a shelf in my bedroom, pointing at the door and most of the room. That night, I went to work like usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight during my break, I opened the camera app on my phone. At first, everything looked normal. The room was dark, with just a bit of light coming in from the street outside. I was about to close the app when I noticed something move. It was subtle, just a slight shift near the bottom of the frame. I froze and stared at the screen. After a few seconds, I realized what it was. My closet door, which I always kept shut, was slowly opening. Not all at once, just inch by inch, like someone was pushing it from the inside. I felt this cold sensation run through me, like all the heat had drained out of my body. I kept watching, unable to look away. The door opened just enough to reveal darkness inside. Nothing else happened for a while, and I started to think maybe it was just the hinge, maybe pressure or something stupid like that. Then I saw it. A shape, barely visible, like a shadow darker than the rest of the closet. It didn't come out, it just stayed there, right at the edge, as if it was watching the room. My phone slipped a little in my hand because I suddenly realized something that made my stomach drop. There was no one else supposed to be in that apartment, and whatever was in that closet hadn't been there when I left, or at least, I didn't think it had been. I left work early that night, making up some excuse about feeling sick. The entire drive back, my mind kept replaying what I saw. By the time I got to the building, it was around 1:15 a.m. The hallway lights flickered on like usual, but this time it felt different, like the silence was heavier. I stood outside my apartment door for a full minute, just listening. Nothing. No movement, no sound. I unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. Everything looked normal at first glance. The living room was exactly how I left it. I walked toward my bedroom, each step feeling louder than it should have. The door was closed. I hesitated before opening it, my hand hovering over the knob. When I finally pushed it open, the room was empty. The closet door was shut again, just like always. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, but it didn't make me feel any better. I checked the closet anyway, pulling the door open quickly, half expecting something to be there. It was empty. Just my clothes, hanging exactly where they should be. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. I decided to go to bed and deal with it in the morning. But as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I heard it. A soft, slow creaking sound, coming from the direction of the closet. At first I thought it was just the building settling, but then I realized it was too consistent, too deliberate. I turned my head slowly, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, and that's when I saw the closet door moving again, opening just slightly, and stopping as if something inside didn't want to be seen. I didn't move at first, not even a little, because some part of me thought that if I stayed completely still, whatever was in that closet might just stop, or at least think I was asleep. The door had opened just enough to leave a thin gap, maybe an inch or two, and through it I could only see darkness. The kind of darkness that looked thicker than the rest of the room, like it had weight to it. I kept my eyes on that gap, trying to listen past the sound of my own breathing. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard something shift inside the closet. It wasn't loud, just a faint scrape, like fabric brushing against wood, but it was enough to confirm that I wasn't imagining it. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand without taking my eyes off the closet door. My hand was shaking more than I wanted to admit. When I finally grabbed it, I turned the flashlight on and pointed it straight at the closet. The beam cut through the darkness instantly, filling the room with harsh white light. The closet door stopped moving. Just froze in place. I stared at it, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. After a few seconds, I forced myself to get out of bed. Each step toward the closet felt wrong, like I was getting closer to something I shouldn't be near. I grabbed the door and pulled it open all the way in one quick motion. There was nothing there. Just my clothes, the same as before, perfectly still. No movement, no sign that anything had been inside. I stood there for a long time, shining the light into every corner, checking the floor, the walls, even the ceiling, like something might be hiding where I couldn't see. Eventually, I backed away and shut the door again, this time pushing a chair up against it. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat in bed with the light on until morning. The next day, I called in sick. I told myself I needed to figure out what was going on before going back to work like nothing was wrong. The first thing I did was check the camera footage from the night before. I sat at my desk, replaying the recording from the time I left for work. For the first few hours, everything looked normal. The room was empty, quiet. Then, around 12:47 a.m., the closet door started to move. Slowly, just like I had seen on my phone earlier. I leaned closer to the screen, watching carefully. The door opened a few inches, and then something shifted inside. It wasn't clear at first, just a darker shape within the darkness. But as I kept watching, it became more defined. It looked like a person standing just inside the closet, completely still. I felt my stomach drop again, that same cold sensation spreading through my chest. The figure didn't come out. It just stood there, facing the room. Minutes passed like that. 5, 10, maybe more. Then, at exactly 1:13 a.m. it moved. Not out into the room, but closer to the door, just enough that part of it crossed into the faint light coming from the window. I paused the video and zoomed in as much as I could. The image got grainy, but I could still make out the outline of a head and shoulders. What bothered me most wasn't just that something was there, it was the way it was positioned. It wasn't looking around or exploring. It was facing directly toward my bed. I checked the timestamp again. That was around the time I would have been driving back home. I kept watching. At 1:14, the figure stepped back into the closet, and the door slowly closed on its own. That was it. Nothing else happened for the rest of the recording. I sat there in silence for a long time, trying to process what I had just seen. I considered calling the police, but I didn't even know what I would say. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing missing, nothing physically damaged. Just a video of something that didn't make sense. That afternoon, I decided to check the apartment more thoroughly. I moved furniture, checked behind everything, even looked for any kind of hidden access point. Eventually, I focused on the closet. I emptied it completely, taking out all my clothes and the small shelf I had set up inside. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The back wall of the closet didn't look quite right. The paint was slightly different, and when I tapped on it, it sounded hollow compared to the rest of the walls. My hands started to sweat as I ran them along the surface, feeling for any kind of edge or seam. After a few seconds, I found it. A thin line running vertically along one side, almost invisible unless you were really looking for it. I pressed against it, and to my surprise, it shifted slightly. It wasn't a solid wall. It was a panel. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding, before pushing harder. The panel gave way just enough to create a narrow opening. A cold, stale smell came out immediately, like air that hadn't moved in a long time. I widened the gap and looked inside. It was a hidden space, just big enough for a person to stand in. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. Someone could have been inside my apartment without me knowing, watching me, waiting. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight again, shining it into the space. The light revealed scuffed walls and a small pile of what looked like old fabric, or maybe blankets on the floor. It didn't look abandoned. It looked used. I stepped back, my mind racing, trying to understand how long this had been there, how long someone might have been using it. And then I noticed something that made everything worse. On the inside wall of that hidden space, scratched into the paint in uneven lines, were marks. Dozens of them, like tally marks, grouped together in sets. I didn't know what they meant, but the number was far too high to be random. I was still staring at them when I heard a faint sound from somewhere deeper inside the wall, like something shifting just out of sight. I froze the second I heard that sound, because it wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from inside the wall itself, from somewhere deeper than that narrow space I had just opened. It was subtle at first, like something dragging lightly against the surface, then it stopped completely, as if whatever made it realized I was there. I didn't breathe, I didn't move, I just stood there with my phone light pointed into that hidden space, waiting to see if it would happen again. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. It stretched on for several seconds, long enough that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, that it was just the building settling or pipes behind the wall. Then it came back, slightly louder this time, followed by a faint, uneven tapping, like someone using their fingers against wood. That was enough. I stepped back immediately and let the panel fall partially shut, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. My first instinct was to leave the apartment right then, but something about the situation made me hesitate. Not curiosity, not exactly, more like a realization that if someone was actually living inside my walls, then just walking out might not solve anything. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter without really thinking and went back to the closet, keeping as much distance from the opening as possible. The panel was still slightly ajar, just enough for that same cold, stale air to seep out. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. No movement, no tapping. Just silence again. I leaned forward slightly and said, as calmly as I could, If someone's in there, you need to come out. My voice sounded strange in that moment, too loud for how quiet everything else was. There was no response. I waited, counting in my head without realizing it, giving it time. Still nothing. Part of me hoped that would be the end of it, that whatever I heard had just been my imagination layered on top of everything else. But then, from inside the wall, I heard a slow exhale. It was faint, but unmistakable, like someone breathing out through their mouth after holding it in. Every part of my body went cold. I didn't say anything else after that. I stepped back again, this time without taking my eyes off the panel, and grabbed my keys from the table. I left the apartment and didn't stop until I was outside the building, standing under the streetlight, trying to steady my breathing. I called the police and told them everything, or at least as much as I could explain without sounding completely insane. They arrived about 15 minutes later and went up with me to the apartment. I stayed in the hallway while they checked inside. I could hear them moving around, opening doors, talking to each other in low voices. After a few minutes, one of them called me in. The panel in the closet had been fully opened. They had flashlights pointed into the hidden space and beyond it. One of the officers looked back at me and asked how long I had been living there. When I told him, he exchanged a glance with the other officer before saying they were going to need backup. That didn't help my nerves at all. More officers showed up not long after, and they spent over an hour going through the walls, tracing where that hidden space led. It turned out it wasn't just behind my closet. It connected to a narrow passage that ran along multiple units in the building, like some kind of maintenance crawlspace that had been sealed off improperly years ago. Eventually, they found where it opened up into a larger section between two apartments on the floor below mine. That's where they found the evidence that made everything feel even worse. There were blankets, empty food containers, bottles of water, and other things that showed someone had been living there for a long time. But there was no person. Whoever had been using that space was gone. One of the officers asked me if I had noticed anything unusual before all this started, and I told him about the lights, the door, the chair, the camera footage. He nodded like it made sense, which somehow made it more unsettling. Before they left, they told me they would file a report and have the landlord seal off all access points immediately. They also suggested I find somewhere else to stay for a while, just in case. I didn't argue. I packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend across town. I never went back to that apartment after that, not even to get the rest of my things. A week later, I heard from the landlord that the spaces had been sealed and checked thoroughly. He claimed there was no sign of anyone still being inside. But there's one thing I never told the police, something I only noticed after I had already left the building that first night. When I was standing outside under that streetlight, trying to calm down, I happened to look up at my apartment window. The light in my bedroom was still on, and from where I was standing, I could see part of the closet door. It was open just enough to show a sliver of darkness inside. And for a second, just a second, I saw something move in that gap, like someone shifting back into hiding, as if they had been watching me leave.